All right, I'll call this meeting of the Muncie Ethics Commission to order. Mr. Lowe, will you read call the roll?
Yes. Chip Taylor,
Present?
Susan Dillon,
Present.
W.C. Edwards,
Present.
Sandra Whitaker,
Present.
and Jim Lowe, present.
Okay. First order of business is approval of the previous minutes. Everybody got a copy of those in your packet. Thanks, Mr. Lowe, for such nice, clear minutes. We have a motion and a second for approval.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. Any additions or corrections? Okay, not hearing any. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. So our main business tonight, we've got, I guess, sort of three documents, parts of our process, the rules and procedures to approve. I think what we need to do to kind of keep with Robert's Rules of Order is have a motion and a second on each of these to introduce them, then we can discuss them. If we need to make any amendments, we can handle that through an amendment process, and then when we take our vote to adopt them, we'll want to do a roll call so we can document that we had a majority of the commission. So first order is the adoption of general rules and procedures. I have a motion to adopt those.
I will make a motion to adopt the general rules and procedures.
Okay, a second?
Second.
All right. I'll open with a little bit of discussion about what we did here. Not a lot of, changes of this from the first draft you looked at are limited. I fixed some, corrected some typos. And then the one substantive part is section 3F, the public comment policy. And what I've got in there, I think, reflects what we discussed at the last meeting. Any questions or comments on that part?
None. Nope.
Okay. We're ready to take the question?
Yep.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second for adoption. Don't hear any other discussion, so call the roll.
Oh, I call the roll. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're secretary.
Yeah, got it. Chip Taylor,
Yes.
Susan Dillon,
Yes.
W.C. Edwards,
Yes.
Sandra Whitaker,
Yes.
and I say yes.
Okay, one down. Okay, the second one is the complaint procedure. I have a motion and a second on adoption of that.
I will motion for the adoption of the complaint process.
Okay, and a second?
Go ahead. Whitaker, okay.
Okay. So more changes here. I'll kind of go through them, and then what I've done here, if you have any questions, if you have any comments from city attorney, certainly welcome. Let me see, go down the list here. So, we'd had the part about receiving complaints. Last time it was kind of blank as to who, so I've updated all that to indicate that it is the city clerk's office that's accepting complaints for us. That's in what's now 2B. And then when Susan and I met and were talking about this, she'd suggested, and this was a good one, that there need to be a process if people had complaints against the commission or any of its members. Well, we obviously, I don't think, can handle complaints against ourselves. That would be problematic. So we've got in there, the city clerk's office accepts a complaint where the commissioner or the members is the respondent, then they forward it to the city attorney instead. And she can figure out what to do about us. Then also I clarified in 2D, I clarified that if the city attorney determines that the complaint alleges a criminal act, then it's the city attorney that'll forward the complaint to the appropriate law enforcement agency. I thought it'd be best to let the attorney handle that. Then in section 3, the notice and initial review, added a paragraph B about public records. And so it basically, it restates kind of the section of the Code of Ethics that basically just says, all our records are subject to the Indiana Access to Public Records Act and will be disclosed or withheld accordingly. And then put in a statement that prior to placing any document in the public record or disclosing it outside the commission, then the chair will consult with the city attorney to make sure that information is disclosed or withheld according to the law. I thought that was, you just gotta make sure everything's straight before it goes out. The next new section is 3C. It talks about complaints filed by employees. This was something that came up, so Susan and I had a phone conversation with Luke Britt at the Public Access Counselor last week. And he told us that, he asked us, if employees, would potentially be filing these complaints, and of course, that's a possibility. And he told us that, I guess they're covered under like a whistleblower statute, and so they have the option to have their name and identifying information withheld from the copy of the complaint that goes to the respondent. Just a member of the community filed a complaint that he said he didn't know of any case law or statute that would affect that. So that's in there. If the complaint's filed by the employees, then they would only get the respondent would only get the description of the violation, alleged violation. The next part is on the notice to the respondent. Also part of our discussion with Luke Britt, he said that, investigative information like lists of potential witnesses or evidence can be withheld from the copy that goes to the respondent and from the public record more generally until you have a reason to put it in there. That was my understanding. And so that's, we've got that statement for the copy that goes to the respondent. And then clarified that the complaint would be sent to the respondent via means that provides confirmation of delivery, which I guess would normally be certified mail, but, there are others. But anyway, left it like that. Let's see, the initial review is the same. So then in section 4, acting on complaints, the changes that have been made there basically went through and have it, so there's, when we get the list of, 42.01D has a list of the different things we can do once the complaint gets in a public meeting. And so I went through the list of different things that could happen. Does it get dismissed? Does it get forwarded? Is there further investigation? Is it undisputed? Is there a public hearing? And so I've got a section for each of that kind of elaborates a little bit about what will happen, particularly to address what goes into the public record at that point. So got there for dismissed complaints, and that can happen like 3 different ways. Basically, once we dismiss a complaint, we would take a copy of the complaint with any redactions that need to be made according to law, and that would go in the public record. That would, I think in most cases, that would basically be what the respondent got, but there may be changes, so that would be one of the things that we'd clarify. We've got a provision, we could forward complaints, say to the HR department and, ask them if they wanted to handle it like as a disciplinary issue. And so if we forward that and stay the complaint, then the complaint would remain confidential. If we forward it and dismiss the complaint or dismiss the complaint when it comes, when they let us know what happened, then in that case, it would be put in the public record with appropriate redactions. If we elect to do further investigation, then at that point, the complaint with the appropriate redactions goes into the public record. And I thought a little bit about how these investigations would happen. And so I think one thing, the chair could assign, say, 2 members of the commission to work together on the investigation. I think, you know, if we get to that point, that's certainly something that then I think those two members would want some guidance from the city attorney. I think there are some things that they might do initially, like as far as gathering documents. You know, if the complaint, you know, had hinged on, you know, something about a contract, then, you know, obtaining a copy of the contract, or if it was about a decision, you know, obtaining copies of the minutes to see like what the minutes reflected. To that extent, they can probably do that without a whole lot of supervision. I mean, I think the city attorney would, you know, we would get some advice on like what an appropriate scope of the investigation would be if we wanted to, you know, take that up. And so they would, those two, or there's potentially more, but I think it would typically be two, would gather that information with the advice from the city attorney, and then would report that back in a written report to the commission that we could use in deciding, you know, what we wanted to do going forward from there. And basically, the written report would remain confidential until, you know, so we take some future action that requires it to be put in the record, like if we went forward to a public hearing or that sort of thing, but that would be decided as we go. The section on undisputed complaints, basically again says, you know, if a complaint was undisputed, then, you know, we issue recommendations for corrective action, and we'd put a copy of the complaint with appropriate redaction in the public record. And of course, those recommendations would have to be approved by a majority vote of the commission. And then finally, the section on the public hearing, if we like to go forward with a public hearing, then clarified that we would have to identify which section or sections we're alleging have been violated. And also clarifying, you know, that according to the ordinance, at that point, the respondent gets copies of all the evidence that we have at that point. So, anyway, that was a lot. If you got questions, I'm glad to.
I do.
clarify.
I have two.
Yes, sir.
So under further investigation, so that's kicked in gear. We're doing some further investigation as itemized under D. Does that put the pause button on the time we have to respond? And maybe it's written in there and I just missed it.
Well, the,
That would indicate that,
yeah, my understanding, so, you know, we received the complaint, we've got a time limit to provide the copy of the complaint to the respondent. We've got a time limit to have that initial, executive session to discuss it. And then there's a certain amount of time after that, that we have to meet, and just, within 30 days after the executive session, we have to hold a public meeting to take action on the complaint. My reading of this, and I'm not an attorney, so just like haul off and hit me anytime if you think I'm acting like an attorney. Poplar Bluff City Attorney, he did, so you can do the same. I think at that point, like, it takes what it takes. I mean, it may depend on, I mean, that 30 days, we would say, I mean, that's gonna be, I think about how this would play out, like, that would be that first session, we decide to do an investigation, then the investigation takes, you know, hopefully, we won't have anything so complicated it couldn't be completed in time to address it at the next meeting, but I think those are the time limits. I mean, once we start the investigation, are there,
So I'll just go ahead and chime in.
Yeah.
Once you get to that 30-day mark and you have that public meeting to decide whatever you need to do at that point, you can decide that you need to do further investigation. Part of the ordinance is
Good.
compelling witnesses to testify and things like that. Something like that's going to take time.
yeah,
So what I would recommend, if you're going to decide to do further investigation, is kind of give yourselves a deadline. The ordinance doesn't require you to, but procedurally, I would recommend
okay,
putting some kind of timeline on yourself. But
And-
it may be done on like a case-by-case basis.
depending on how complicated or simple the
yeah, and
case was.
that's the point. We want to do the due diligence. We
Right.
don't want to rush into this, so if it takes time to really investigate, don't we be stressed because 30 days, we have to say, here's what we determined.
Yeah.
So I like your interpretation. Thank you.
You have a second question?
The second was, I don't know why I can't get my hands around what this means, but under E, undisputed complaints,
Yeah.
the commission, there are ways that we can rule on what it has basically determine when a complaint is filed, but it says recommendations for corrective actions according to section 42.8. What is a corrective action? Where's that defined? And I'm not, maybe it's just the way it's written.
Well, I think that's, so generally, you think about, so the decision after a hearing, if, so let me put it this way, so if we had an investigation and we had a hearing, we voted and we said, well, there's preponderance of the evidence, there was a violation, okay, we can make recommendations for corrective action. And so that could be, it could be a number of things, all the way up to like recommending the city attorney take them to city court, right? Or it might be, talk to it, it could be, here, this is a case, we're gonna, depending on what it is, say it was an employee, it's like, well, here, we'll let their supervisor deal with this as a, we recommend they deal with this as a disciplinary issue, say, or, whatever it is, whatever we think is an appropriate way to resolve the complaint.
And that's not overstepping our power authority.
It's just advisory.
It's
All
advisory.
all we can do is recommend.
To
Got it.
initiate that action, but
Okay.
you can just make a recommendation
Yeah.
on what you think should happen, and
Okay.
then
Yeah, basically, the way I see our, somebody files a complaint, we look at it, if we determine it looks like there was a record, here's what we think should happen, and then, the person that actually holds accountability over whoever this is, they'll do what's appropriate. And I think the undisputed, I don't see many ways you get there without maybe scheduling a hearing, and then, of course, their procedure, because it also addresses us in 4202D, to resolve a complaint with an agreed settlement. Otherwise, the only way I see you get an undisputed is if you send a copy of the complaint to the respondent and they say, oh, yeah, I did that. I plead guilty, or, whatever. I don't see that happening very often, but I think that will come, anyway, it covers every possibility, I think.
So it really is impossible to delineate in some fashion what corrective action is. You have to wait until you have a situation. And then
Yeah.
from there, you can determine what we believe collectively
That makes
should be the,
sense.
okay, all right, I got it now. Okay.
Belinda, did you have any concerns with the procedure for your office or any recommendations?
I'm more than happy to help facilitate, it seems, but I was thinking, somebody wanted to send you the forms directly to one of your emails, would that be?
I-
Or do you want us to be a pass-through?
I-
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, my thought was that's, something your office does, there's somebody besides us that says when it was actually brought in and filed, because the date's stamped on it.
Right, we can file stamp anything that comes in like we do when we take a bid, and we can I've even got a file cabinet, I can start collecting documents for you. if you
Yeah.
like.
Well, because I think that's gonna be important, because, we need some place for all the documents to be, even if they haven't been put into the public record, or if a copy's been provided to somebody and had information withheld, we need the original actual document someplace,
We've got
so.
room right now.
So I think that's, there's other stuff we generate, our annual report and stuff that you're certainly more familiar with the, records laws and the retention laws, but, don't necessarily have to be held in a paper copy someplace, but, all the stuff related to the complaints, people asking for an advisory opinion, any records that are, generated out of a public hearing, there needs to be some place that like those records are actually, physically kept.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you. Things been going pretty good, so I'm not expecting we're gonna generate big stacks of documents, but we'll find
And I
out.
like that formal gateway. I think it's good.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way.
So if I'm correct in saying, nobody sees these complaints until we all see them as a commission, right?
Right, so, they come in and file it, what happens, they come in and file it while I'm chair, then it would be sent to me. I would consult with the city attorney over it to make sure if they've alleged a criminal violation, then the city attorney will like hand it off to the appropriate law enforcement agency, and then we don't do anything else with it. If it doesn't allege a criminal violation, then at that point, we all, all the members of the commission would get a copy. We'll schedule an executive session, and, meet together and with the city attorney, and we can't decide anything there, but we can discuss it, and, we can talk about like what sort of further investigation might be needed, or, we can discuss it. Then at a public meeting, we decide, we'd vote and decide what that initial action would be. But yeah, so the only other person that would see it in that time is the respondent will get a copy at least of some portion of the complaint within 7 days of filing. But other than that, it's not a public record until we put things into the public record.
Well, I really appreciate the idea of it going to her first, or to legal first, because, well, it's obvious.
Yeah, well,
get
I mean,
yourself in it.
yeah, I mean, the ordinance
In a pickle
requires.
real quick.
Right, I mean, the ordinance requires if it alleges a criminal violation, we don't deal with it, we hand it off, and so, nobody's gonna decide whether it's a criminal violation except an attorney, right? So, that's,
That could ward off a lot of
'Cause all I was saying
potential problems.
is that we all see it at the same time. Nobody gets a sneak peek at it.
I see it, the chair sees it first, but otherwise, mainly so that like, at least up to the point, they decide that the city attorney decides it's a criminal violation, and then at that point, I think if we hand it off to a law enforcement agency, the fewer people that know what was in it, probably the better. I mean, I would assume the law enforcement agency would prefer that.
I've got a hypothetical, just because I'm used to being attacked during campaign year. What if the complaint's about me, or my office? Or what if it's about, the
Any one of us.
administration and
Yeah,
city attorney is
right.
the administration's attorney, so those are conflicts of interest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I was thinking of is when someone files a complaint, they print it off, or if they come and ask us for a copy, we give them an envelope to put it in, and we file stamp the outside of the envelope. For like, just a general, that way nobody in my office can read it.
It becomes sealed.
Right.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
Okay.
when I mentioned that
And
this
so
thing is
then-
sealed.
And then you'd let the chair know
Let you know
that we've got one.
that we received some documents and that someone needs to come in and pick them up. That's what I think, for my personal,
Would we
in
need
my office.
to look at 'em at all? Would we need to look at them
Right.
at all?
And how would you
Because we're
We
making a
need to-
print it
judgment.
off without
Right.
somebody
We
reading
need
it?
to commit
How do you
perfect
do that?
They want it,
Not
they
just
print off the
about
blank
one-
document,
one
they
person.
handwrite
That
it.
makes sense.
Okay.
That's all I'm
Give them
saying.
an envelope to
That
put it in, we'll file
means
stamp the
he's in a
outside.
position of judgment that he shouldn't have to
As
take
opposed to
that off.
somebody doing this online and sending it by email?
They could do it.
Could do,
online,
okay.
Yeah.
but, I mean, it depends on how comfortable they feel with the confidentiality.
So if somebody really wanted to be confidential, they'll come in and do a handwritten, put it in an envelope, and hand it to
I'm
you.
more than happy to
Got
do
it.
that.
Okay.
I don't want anyone to say that information was leaked to the public, that shouldn't
Yeah.
have.
Yeah,
You know, there's so many things you get accused of that aren't even true.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. that it might get leaked and somebody's gonna blame.
I don't wanna say it came out of my
Right.
office. I wanna
Well-
And I don't want
protect
the chair-
citizens as
Agreed.
much as
Chair
possible.
the,
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly,
Kind of software program for it to be just all online and electronically.
Any document that they give me can be generated in a PDF document someone can fill in and email them directly, but it doesn't, if they do that, it doesn't come through my office for a file stamp. Does that make sense?
It does, but there's still like a date and time
Yeah.
stamp on those.
With the electronic yes.
That, yeah, I guess the reason I focused on doing a physical hand in at first was like, we're supposed to be able to take complaints by March 1st, which is a Saturday, so I guess actually March 3rd. And I was afraid that, getting like the electronic process set up, we wouldn't be able to meet that.
If you have the documents ready tomorrow, I could have them converted tomorrow. I mean, but you're still in your
Yeah.
plan.
What advice do you have for us?
I mean, I completely understand Belinda's concern. As far as coming up with a solution for that, I'm not 100% sure other than some kind of electronic means for it to go directly to you,
Okay.
to avoid anyone else looking at it first.
well,
go ahead.
who should be looking at it first is what he's
That's
saying.
what I'm saying.
Who should look at it first?
Either if you guys want to just designate the chairman to do it, or all of you at the same time.
And
So-
that's what I was looking at the same
Yeah.
time, because that way, it hasn't got leaked out anywhere, and we all saying the same thing at the same time.
And I'm sure IT could set it up that way. and just
Unless it goes
automatically
directly
to
to
all your
her.
emails, I would assume.
I would have to ask, but then if there was a confidential email to one of them individually, if it's set up that way, they all get the same email. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to complicate.
Yeah, no, I,
it's a
I'm
good
not
point.
either.
You could give two options, you could give the option, physically to come to my office or electronically submit it, and we have a PDF document that they can download, fill in. If they know how to, fill it out and save it and submit it. It's just there's two different options there, or available.
It could be they could download it online, or they can come pick up a copy, because some
Yeah.
people may not have a printer.
yeah.
And the rules would be then, once you complete it, you bring it back sealed to her office. And then it comes to us. I mean, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It would protect you, and I agree. The only other way was it comes to us, and then we go, okay, legit,
Okay.
stamp it, give it a number.
Okay, I guess to give us time to get something electronic set up, could we do it that way that, I mean, so, we talked earlier about getting the complaint form online and stuff, and follow up with that, if we could just, add to the instructions, online, or like when they bring, if they bring one down, like, could you just hand them an envelope and
Yeah, here's
say,
an envelope, put it in there, file stamp the outside, and we'll put it in the safe. This is how I would,
yeah, and then you can contact the chair, and I guess then the chair would be responsible for
someone
getting it
submitted it
out to everybody.
if you adopt the complaint form tonight, I can take a copy of it and have it ready tomorrow.
Okay, well, we adopted, I can email you a copy of it, or, yeah,
Okay.
okay. That's.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we didn't make any modifications within that conversation to the complaint procedure. There's no motion to add terminology. It's as we have it written, correct?
Correct.
Just good discussion. Okay.
Yeah, because I think, because it doesn't say, how the clerk's office forwards it to me, or, I think the putting in an envelope fits within the process we've got here. And then,
Well, just so you're aware, probably it would just be either me or Lacey that would be contacting you. My other staff primarily do court work.
Mm-hmm.
Unless both of us are off at the same time, there wouldn't be any reason to hear from anybody else. Maybe
Okay.
Ruby, Morris,
Okay.
but I just wanna limit the contact people have to the documents.
I understand.
Probably gonna lock your file cabinet too.
Yeah, and then I guess then once we have that and we see that it is not you that they've filed a complaint on, then we can get with you and make sure that, like, you know, the documents in the file and,
I mean, I hope nobody
Oh,
does, but
yeah,
I get threatened all the time, so.
well, yeah, we gotta try and cover every possibility, even if they're slim, at least if, you know, it's foreseeable.
And I'll talk to Dan Gibson and see if, you know, let's say a complaint is filed against our office or against his office, then the opposite.
You use
office
the
can-
other attorney.
Yeah, so
That's-
let me talk to him first, make sure he's okay with that. but
Yeah.
It seems like the logical
Well,
solution.
and in the committee, we discussed that, and that's why there's in there, it says that, like, we can seek help from the city attorney or the city council attorney, and that was the reason. But yeah, talk to him but that was, we had that discussion when we were putting it together, that there could be a case where, you know, the city attorney, you know, has a conflict, and so then it would, you know, he could step in and,
That sounds like
Do
a
that.
perfect idea.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so like if it's a council member, then you would contact city attorney. If it's administration, you would contact council attorney.
Yeah. So do we need to make an amendment to this?
To C, say forwarded to the city attorney or city council attorney.
I think you're fine leaving the wording as it is. I think we all understand what it means.
Okay.
Because the ordinance is going to trump your process anyway.
Okay,
The ordinance gives you that option.
okay. Yeah, okay, that sounds good, and then we can, if we ever come back to make some other changes to this, then maybe we can incorporate that in there. Okay. Any other questions or concerns, comments?
Okay, ready for the call for vote?
I think so.
Okay. So on item 4B, complaint process, Chip Taylor,
Yes.
Susan Dillon,
Yes.
W.C. Edwards,
Yes.
Sandra Whitaker,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Okay. Okay, and so now we've got basically two parts to this. We've got basically a rule adopting a complaint form, and then there's the complaint form. And I want to especially thank Susan Dillon. She did the yeoman's work on this. I had that one that I'd sort of distributed the last meeting. I said, I'm the last person you need doing this. And she's got a nice one here. Oh,
Do we need a motion?
we need a motion.
I'll motion that we introduce adoption of the complaint form.
So move.
Okay, got a second from Sandra Whitaker. Okay, now, so let me back up. So what we've done here, we've arranged this. So for one thing, separate pages here. The front page has the complainant information, the person that's filing a complaint, and some stuff where we can kind of track what happened as it goes through the process. The second page has the respondent information and the complaint details, and they can add additional pages if they need to. And then the last page is where we ask for if they know of any witnesses or if they know of any additional evidence, and they indicate whether they're a city employee, they indicate if they want to have their identity withheld, and then they sign it. And so this way, the complaint number is on every page. And so what we're thinking was if this is a case where it's a city employee and they ask for their information be withheld, then, the copy that we give the respondent just doesn't have this first page that's got the, complainant information on it. They get the second page. They don't get the third page because that would be the investigative information. So the full complaint would be all 3 pages plus anything else they attached. The respondent would get the second page, and if the complainant wasn't a city employee, then they would, or they didn't request their identity be withheld, they'd get, the front page. One question I had, because I didn't think to ask Luke Britt this when we were talking to him, and I followed an email later, but then I saw he's stepping down, so I don't know that I'll ever get an answer back. So, say it's not a city employee files a complaint, and so we don't withhold their information. Is it permissible or required or prohibited to withhold their contact information and address and stuff?
So I'm actually gonna cover the Access to Public Records Act in a little
Okay.
bit. But that handbook that I gave all of you kind of
Yeah.
gives you different scenarios. There are some contact information that is confidential. Some of it is also dependent on your job. So,
Okay.
like
Law enforcement
judges.
officers.
So their address cannot be disclosed.
Okay.
It depends on the circumstance, so you'd have to look at each individual, and
Okay.
make a determination at that point,
All right.
but their name is not.
Yeah, that was the focus of our discussion with Luke Britt. Didn't think to ask the detail. Yeah, so what I had in mind to make kind of streamline some of the stuff is to make up a checklist of what would cover the base cases. Let you look at that and say, yeah, that looks like, and then case by case basis, we'd operate off of that, and then then you could tell the chair, it's no, here's where you need to depart from that standard, something to try and not reinvent the wheel every time. But that was, anyway, that was the thought.
And I had one question, but I think you answered it. And I know you helped create this, Susan. So the person filing the complaint only sees pages 1 and 2.
The person filing the complaint has the whole thing.
Okay, so the person filing the complaint would fill out page 3?
Yeah, so we're basically, we're asking, were there any other witnesses to what happened?
I'm kind of flowing you to my question. I
Yeah.
apologize for doing that, but
That's right.
it got a little confusing to me where it said complaint details, and you'd fill all this out and add sheets if necessary, but then you're also adding this. So it is required that they fill out page 3.
Only, I guess,
In
really,
addition to what they're
only
doing
to the
on page two.
extent that they sign it. If they don't know of any other witnesses, or they don't,
Okay,
no, because that's technically so the ordinance specifies this, who, the respondent, and this nature, date, time, and location of each occurrence. That kind of comes right out of the ordinance. We thought it made sense to ask them, are there, was somebody else in the room when this happened, right? Or do you have any emails, or, do you have other evidence they could tell us about that, which would help us in the investigation. If they don't tell us or don't know, then, they don't put it on there. But no, strictly speaking, they would not have to list any witnesses or talk about any additional evidence. That's,
okay.
I mean, that might be something, if there was an investigation, if we decided to interview the complainant, that might be, something to find out, to talk to him in more detail about it. So my thought was the respondent, they get this page, we would need to look at it. If they mentioned any witnesses or mentioned any evidence in here, then that would need to be redacted. But, we tried to keep the form simple and not ask them too many questions they wouldn't know the answer to.
Wonder if they don't have any witnesses want to come forth at that time. Is there any room to
Well,
add witnesses or what?
I think, yeah, I mean, if,
Some people say, leave me out of this, I don't want to be in this stuff. Then they talk them into it, and they want to become a witness, do you allow it or do you disallow it?
That would be up to all of you. You can certainly allow it as your investigation goes on, or you can say, no, you have to have it in by a certain deadline. The ordinance itself doesn't say, so you can add that to your procedures.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that would be one of those things if, you know, what, in the investigation, you know, if we had one we're going to investigate, you know, interviewing the complainant to just like talk through, you know, get more detail or whatever, it might come up at that point. You know, at that point, I mean, if we know there are other witnesses, then, you know, we could decide to pursue those if we needed to. If, I mean, at some point, we can only act on like what they tell us or, you know, what else we might come across in the course of investigating it, because we can't, I mean, this is what starts us in motion is the complaint. So, you know, if they tell us of witnesses, then we know that. If they don't, then we don't. But, you know, we might find out more as we begin investigating.
Right.
Well, that can go either way. People can say, yeah, I will, and then they won't, or, you know, that can go both ways.
Yeah, so,
Ready for the vote?
unless there's more comments or questions.
Good.
All right.
All right, on item 4C, adoption of complaint form, Chip Taylor,
Yes.
Susan Dillon,
Yes.
W.C. Edwards,
Yes.
Sandra Whitaker,
Yes,
and I vote yes.
Okay, that's all our action required stuff. I brought clean copies after we're done. We can, you and I need to sign them
Sign 'em.
and we can
Okay.
hear that. So, new business. So you have in your packet, a draft, process for, issuing advisory opinions. And so this comes up in the ordinance, it's in section 40.09, it's the conflicts of interest in decisions and voting. And so, which is separate from, there's a couple sections that have to do with conflicts of interest with contracts or contracting with the city. This is different, this is on the decisions and voting. And so the idea is, this is an area where people have, you know, individuals that would be affected by this, they have the ability to ask for an advisory opinion. If there's some conflict, they could, you know, basically they can ask, you go about it and say, look, this is really minor, it's not gonna affect anything, can you give us an opinion that says that it would be okay? And we, you know, we could look at it or not. And so I was thinking about the process here, and so this is one where you'll want to hear that we can do notices by email address, because this is gonna be employees or people in the city, right? And nobody's in trouble here; they're just seeking advice. And so I've got that, you know, they would seek an advisory opinion. They basically prepare a memorandum to the chair that would contain the information that's required in the ordinance that asks, you know, that it asks for. And if they're not elected official, they've got to identify their immediate supervisor, their appointing authority, and sign it. Now, what I've got here is submitting it. We were going to have that through the clerk's office too. It's, in this case, there shouldn't be any problem. It's nobody's in trouble with this. No accusations.
I just had a side thought. You were talking about an email going to Alden directly. I can check with IT, I'm backing up, sorry.
Okay.
I can check with IT and have six email for complaints, and you have to label it. but then I'm gonna see if they can have anything sent to that email automatically forwarded to all 5.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm thinking as you talk.
That's all right.
All right.
That's a good thing.
That's, and so, basically, they would submit this request, and it comes to the chair. And at that point, like, then the chair could assign 2 members of the commission to meet with the individual, their immediate supervisor or whatever, and talk about the nature of the conflict and figure out, like, is this serious or is it something that's not substantial? And report back to the commission. Because once they ask for an advisory opinion, we can do 2 things. We can say, yeah, this is not substantial, and here's why, and so it's okay. Don't worry about it. Or we can say, no, this is serious. You need to take these steps to separate this person from the decision. And so these 2 members go meet with them and get an idea, figure out like which course of action they want to recommend to the commission that we take, and provide that report back stating one way or the other. And then we would act on that in a public meeting. If we accept the recommendation in the report, then we put the request for an advisory opinion in the report in the record, in the public record. And, give it to us, say, yeah, here's the answer. If the commission doesn't accept the recommendation, then we don't issue an advisory opinion. I mean, I would assume that, the commission members go do this investigation, they're gonna be diligent, come back with a good recommendation, and we'll trust them and we'll pass it. If for some reason we don't, then we just haven't issued an opinion. They would need to back up and, basically, they'd have to back up and do what they would have had to done if they'd never asked for an advisory opinion.
Which is submit a form.
Which is submit a disclosure, and here's how we're gonna deal with the conflict. Now, also, I put in provision here that, like, they can withdraw the request. So, at the point before we issue it, they can withdraw the request, and what I was thinking was, if they meet with the 2 that go meet with them, they look at them, and like, they don't, offer them, any hope that they're gonna recommend that it's insubstantial and they don't deal with it, then they've always got the chance, well, okay, there's no point in like spending any more time on this. We'll just back up and do the disclosure. So that's, yeah, and then the rest of it, and then then it talks about the form of the disclosure, and again, they just, if they decide to file a disclosure, it comes out, then they put it in a memorandum and send it to the chair, and the disclosure will get filed.
So there's no template. They provide whatever they want to provide to get to the point where they feel comfortable, they know which direction.
Yeah, so the ordinance,
How does the clerk's office code that then differently? Well, so you're going to assign a number to an actual complaint. You assign a number to this, an advisory?
that's what I've proposed in here, that the
You still
number.
assign a number to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think like we do with resolutions and ordinances, there's a numbering system. We could.
Yeah, there's one thing I'm gonna talk to you about, the number. I mean, I think it would be, some version of the year and a sequential number like they do with the ordinances, because we'll have complaints. We'll have requests for advisory opinion, and then we'll have disclosures. And so I think they could each have like a different prefix,
Right.
Depending on the complaint or an advisory opinion request or a disclosure, and then
So it
just
could be MEC for Muncie Ethics Commission,
like,
month, year, and then the last letter could be the form as actually filed. Or
Yeah, so
It's
I-
an advisory or it's a
For
disclosure.
the ordinances is the year, the number, like that the ordinances come in, 1, 2, 3, 4, like however they're filed.
Right.
And then the last 2 digits would be, so like.
1-25 and 2-25.
Or res, and so, I mean, that's how we do those.
Good.
So we could have
Yeah.
complaint 1-25, advisory opinion, we can come up with, I think we can come up with a
Okay.
nomenclature to, Yeah, but yeah, there's no, so I think what might be helpful is like if we pull what's required out of the ordinance and give it an instruction sheet, here's what the memorandum needs to say. Because it basically, it just, it asks them to describe the nature of the conflict and what could be done to, keep the person shielded from involvement in the decision and that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's, any thoughts?
I mean, I would defer to Belinda on how to number and
Yeah.
file all of that. It's whatever is easiest for her office.
Yeah, yeah, I'll talk to you after the meeting, fair one to come by, because we've got some other, so,
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up, I just don't want to put her staff in a position where they're making determination, is this advisory or is this an actual complaint? And it's pretty clear one or the other,
yeah,
by the way they file it.
yeah.
Okay,
So,
okay.
And also those are, the advisory opinions and the disclosures, it's like they don't have the same confidentiality issues that the complaints have. So I mean, that's one, if anybody ever had any question, they can, contact, tell them what it is. So, okay, so I'll work on that and get with, we can kind of communicate through email on this, and we'll kind of go what we think is a final version, see if you've got time, like let you, take a look at it, and then we'll have it back have it in your packet for the next meeting. So the other new business is the ethics training, so I'll turn it over to you, Aubrey.
Dan Gibson was going to attend tonight. Unfortunately, he got the flu that's going around. So, he will come to your next meeting and cover the criminal side of things. I'll briefly touch on it tonight, but I'm not going to go into detail. Dan said he would cover that the next time.
Okay.
So, have all of you had a chance to read through the ethics ordinance?
Yes.
Yes,
I think I did.
yes.
Do you have a copy of it? Do you want me to send you a copy?
I think
Are we talking about this?
talk about the ethics ordinance.
I don't know if it was handed out at the last meeting.
I got copies of it
must
to
have
everybody,
I must have then. I just don't have it
before the
with
first
me.
meeting or at the first meeting.
Yeah, I don't have it with me, but
Okay.
that's all.
I can share
That's
mine
okay.
with you.
So, I wanna go over, so some of the sections in here, Dan went over in your last meeting. A good portion of what's in here is also related to the criminal code, so again, I'll briefly touch on it. Before I begin, those of you that have read through it entirely, do you have specific questions, because I can go ahead and address those.
I do not.
No. All right, when we have dealt with some ethical questions, especially as it relates to a conflict of interest, we have found that a lot of people don't understand the term immediate family member. So I would highly recommend just taking a closer look at that definition in your ordinance. In the ordinance, the immediate family member is a spouse of an elected official, appointed official, officer, or employee. It's a child, stepchild, or adoptee of, again, an elected official, appointed official, officer, or employee who is unemancipated and less than 18 years of age. So adult children do not count. It is also an individual who receives more than 50% of his or her support from elected official, all of that. So what that kind of tends to refer to are situations like your 20-year-old is in college, but they live at home and you care for them. Or you have a disabled child who is an adult and you provide care for them. Those are immediate family members under this.
Okay.
Does all of that make sense?
It's not cousins and
Right.
all that, right, yeah.
Or if, you know, your adult child is married and living elsewhere, that's not an immediate family member under this section of
Right.
the ordinance. The particular matter, which comes up, that language comes up several times in your ordinance. It's pretty, all-inclusive. So, it's going to include all sorts of business transactions, contracts, investigations, lawsuits, economic development projects, things like that. Public works projects, which the public works, those projects are, it's all public record. Belinda does a really great job of getting all of that posted. Sorry. Another question we have received is related to accepting gifts and food, things like that, as a public official. There have been instances where people are concerned, well, I attended this meeting as a representative of the city, and they had this whole coffee and breakfast spread. Am I allowed to accept that? Something like that is okay. Now, if they are handing out gift cards or something along those lines, that would be more of a gift. Simply grabbing a coffee that's out for everyone, that's acceptable, and that is not an ordinance violation. What we have put together, especially for employees, is different scenarios where we go over that gift exchange and the difference between a gift, favor, things like that. The personnel director put together a PowerPoint to explain all of these scenarios and go through it with all of the employees. We're working on getting all of that updated so that we can distribute. We are going to send you guys a copy as well. Confidential information. So this is actually going to cover in your ordinance and that handout that I gave all of you. So just a brief explanation on what that handout is. The public access counselor puts out a handbook to kind of explain certain areas, frequently asked questions, things like that. It covers the Access to Public Records Act and the Open Door Law. The Open Door Law is related to meetings. The Records Act is related to public documents. The confidential information. So, let me show you. On page, so in that handout on page. So it's on page 27, if you want to turn to take a look at that. So those public records and the kinds that are, excuse me, accessible to the public and required to be accessible, they include any writing, paper, report. I'm not going to go into all of that for you, but that is created, received, retained, maintained, or filed by or with a public agency. That can be whether it's stored in a file cabinet, it can be if it's on the server, a drive somewhere, like a flash drive. Those are all public documents. There are exceptions to that. If you flip to the next page, page 28, there in the middle, it gives you some examples of things that are not public access that would include juvenile law records, CHINS cases, which is DCS related, confidential motor vehicle records, victim contact information for crimes, certain school records, records that contain trade secrets, grade transcripts and license examination scores, patient medical records, anything with a social security number. As you go through, and this will come up in your complaints, as you go through some of these documents, let's say 3 years from now, someone wants and sends a public records request for a complaint that happened a year before. You would have to go back through your records. And depending on what is in that file and what is listed, there may be information that has to be redacted. Oftentimes, government agencies get confused on, okay, if most of this page needs to be redacted, should I just not hand it over? And that's not true. So if you can still redact, and there's still information on that page, you have to produce the page. You just go through and you redact, which most of that can be done on the computer at this point. Most of your records are going to be electronically stored. You can go through and here for the city, it's the communications director that helps with that. If there are legal questions related to that, that's sent out to either of the attorneys, depending on where the record request is. So if it's related to city council, it's sent to their attorney. If it's related to the administration, it's sent to our office. So you'll go through that. Let's say, for example, one of the witnesses on a complaint is a minor, and they list a bunch of information about the minor. Can't disclose that. So you would have to go through. And what's tricky is that with those scenarios, it's their identity that is confidential. It is not what happened related to that. So you would have to go through, if they witnessed something and they made a statement, you'd have to go through and redact all of their information. Or let's say it was worded, Joe said X happened, then Joe said this. You would go through and redact all of the Joes
Okay,
in that document, and then you would still produce the document.
right,
Does all of that make sense?
yeah.
So those are the records that are absolutely non-disclosable. There are records that they can be disclosed, or they can be kept confidential. It's completely discretionary and up to the government agency. So if you find a scenario that's good here. Okay. So let's say the city is working on a project, some big construction project, for example, but they haven't quite figured out all the details yet. Nothing's finalized. There's no contract in place. There's usually a lot of emails and letters that go back and forth leading up to finalizing that contract. All of those notes back and forth are discretionary in a public records request. So the city doesn't have to disclose it. They can if they want to. But those notes back and forth leading up to a decision, you don't have to disclose. But that final decision, yes, you have to disclose. So, personal notes of employees and things like that, a lot of us have notes that just help you get your job done a little easier. Those personal notes that you don't have to disclose. But again, it's discretionary, it's not required. So if you want to keep some, but disclose others, you can do it that way. Okay?
Okay.
If a municipality denies a public records request, they have to explicitly state why. Not only do they have to list a reason, but they have to cite to state code so that whoever requested it can go back through and see if the city is citing correctly and if it really is something that they can withhold. For example, a lot of municipalities get public records requests for information related to terminated employees. There are certain aspects that can be withheld. There are certain aspects that have to be withheld, and there are certain aspects that are required to be disclosed. The hire date, the fire date, that has to be disclosed. The actual reasons, an actual summary of the reasons why the person was terminated, that has to be disclosed. And oftentimes, so the Public Access Counselor has done a lot of opinions on that in particular because government agencies don't always want to give out all of the information related to a termination because they want to make sure that the employee's record is confidential, but the media wants more information. It makes a better story. So they try to find that balance between a full explanation but not disclosing too much of the employee's information. So let's say, for example, someone was fired for violating a procedure, and the media requested that information. The city would have to disclose what procedure was violated and how it was violated. So just like a factual scenario that led to that termination. Okay? If another issue that comes up frequently is related to how you receive those records back from the agency. If they are electronically stored, you can receive those electronically, which means the city or county, whoever, cannot charge you for that. So if all of your records are stored electronically and someone requests it electronically, you have to give it back to them electronically. You can't force them to come in. Okay?
Okay.
Those are the main issues that tend to come up with public records. I'm going to go into public meetings.
Could I ask a quick question? Is there, I should know this, but I don't recall. Is there a statute of limitation on how far back you have to go for a public records request?
So the request has to be narrowly tailored.
Okay.
There's not like an exact deadline for how far back you can go. Now, there's record retention schedules that are put out by the state, depending on what agency it is and what governing body within the municipality. They have different requirements. If a municipality or board or what have you wants to destroy records, let's say it's been 10 years, they would need to check with the state, review the retention schedule, and then there's certain forms, depending on the document or recording you're wanting to destroy, you have to follow that procedure. Let's say, for example, they're recordings of meetings from 3-5 years ago. There's a form with the state that you would have to essentially request permission, but without that permission back from the state, you can't destroy it.
Purge. Okay. Thank you.
We have cassette tapes, we have old cassette tapes in the file, I just haven't done anything with them yet.
Yeah. It's a long process to get through it, to destroy old information, so.
Can you still play a cassette tape?
We do have a tape.
Oh, do you?
recorder. There's a shoebox full of cassette
Yeah.
tapes.
Any other questions on records?
Thank you.
Okay, so the open door law, which handles the public meetings. The most common issue that I have run into are email exchanges. So I want you guys to turn to page 8. Because with the boards and commissions, this happens very frequently. top of page 9. So, this is another one of those scenarios that the public access counselor came up with. Are email exchanges considered meetings? Well, whether an email exchange is considered a meeting is largely dependent upon the nature and intent of the communication. He wrote that if the governing body is trying to communicate simultaneously and expecting an immediate call and response type dialogue for the purpose of taking official action on business, the exchange constitutes a meeting. So let's say you all know you have something urgent coming up, but you, for some reason, you decide you're gonna send an email to everyone, try and get an idea of how everyone's feeling on it before the meeting. And you ask them to go ahead and respond. That is a public meeting, and that is a violation of the open door law. So you have to be very careful with how you're communicating to your fellow board members. Okay? That happens very frequently. People don't tend to understand that one. The same would go with serial meetings. So if you flip back to page 8, a lot of public officials try to get around the open door law by trying to have serial meetings, which means, let's say the chairman really wants something to pass at the next meeting, so he starts meeting with everyone individually to try and get votes ahead of time. That's a serial meeting, and it's a violation of the open door law. You're supposed to wait until the public meeting so that the public can hear, to be able to talk about that. Okay? Let's see.
Are texts on iPhones addressed as well?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that would be thrown into like the email.
It's
exchanges,
email category,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I think it's important to note that if you are using your personal cell phone or your personal email for exchanges related to government work, you are then opening up your personal information. So if someone has a public records request, you have to disclose that information from your personal account. So it's highly recommended that you don't use your personal email, your personal cell, things like that. Have a separate one. Okay. Notice of public meetings, which I believe Belinda handles a lot of that. All right.
Just the council.
Just
Yeah,
council.
well, yeah, we don't,
Okay.
any of the other boards, we're not in charge of.
Okay. So public notice has to be posted before a public meeting. You have to do it 48 hours before. Executive sessions, those notices are very different. With an executive session, you have to cite to the exact statute and the exact subsection of the statute for what you're talking about. You can only talk about those items that are listed. So if you publish that you are talking about litigation, and in the middle of the meeting, someone brings up a different topic, you are now in violation of the open door law. So you have to make sure that you are staying on topic at all times during an executive session. Even if you venture from litigation to another subcategory that would be allowed for an executive session, if you did not post notice for that extra content, you can't talk about it. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. I would say, I think the executive session we have to initially discuss a complaint would be, I think, the reason we might, semi-routinely be holding one. So I may reach out to you to make sure, like, what the format of that.
What I'll do is go ahead and just put one together, and then all you have to do is switch out the day and time.
Sounds good.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I understand too, I think that the minutes of that just need to reflect that, like, we discussed, things under that. I mean, it's
And
cite,
it didn't venture outside.
yeah, it cites the code. We discussed things under that.
So,
And it has to match what you posted notice for.
Yeah.
so is there an issue if you cite certain statute? This is what we're going to discuss during the executive session, and we cite 10 things and only get to 5. So overstated by 5. We didn't get to those 5.
I mean, if you didn't get to the extra 5,
Right.
that's okay. It's if
So
you
what I typically
don't
see is you
post it,
cite everything you think you'll discuss, so that you got it covered.
You just
Yeah.
can't list the entire statute. You have
Yeah.
to narrow it down.
Narrow it
to
down.
exactly what you think you're going to be talking
Yeah.
about.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? And executive sessions are a little strange, so.
Yeah.
Those are the most common issues that come up with the open door law. A lot of these scenarios you're not going to deal with, so you can just kind of skip over all of that. Do you guys have any questions before I move over to the ordinance? Does everyone understand what nepotism is in the context of the ordinance? Are there any questions on how nepotism works? Great. All right. Contracting with the city, which is section 40.07. I have a feeling this one is going to come up a lot, especially with public works and all of the contracts that they deal with. You're gonna want to familiarize yourself with this section in particular. I know we went over a little bit of that earlier. So as I look through this, Belinda, I've got a question for you. So the requirement in the ordinance is about entering into a contract or renewing a contract with an individual or business that is described in one of the above sections. And that's to be filed with your office, not later than 15 days after final action. Do you have a procedure on where you're going to post that, or are you just gonna keep that internal? Sorry.
No, it's okay. However you wanna do it, I mean.
Well, let's ask all of you. So, this section in particular requires a notice to be filed, a copy of which is going to be with the city clerk. And it's related to contracts, new contracts, or renewing older ones. It has to be in writing, it's gotta describe the contract or purpose, what have you. And the relationship with the elected official, appointed official, or employee has to be that particular individual or business. How, with Belinda's office, how would you like to be able to observe that? Do you want her to? I mean, I don't like it posted, but I don't know what all is accessible on the website.
So, when you turn back to the part about the transparency portal, there's some requirements that there are certain things that need to be posted where they're available. That includes the advisory opinions, it includes, conflict of interest forms filed with the Ethics Commission and/or the city clerk and/or the state of Indiana. So, but those would need to be posted electronically.
We usually says, I mean, the actual conflict of interest form is supposed to be submitted to the State Board of Accounts.
And this is actually above and beyond that, this particular file.
We don't post them anywhere, we keep them in a file,
Okay.
but honestly, not,
So,
there's the only person
I-
like that that I get them from now is Sarah Golding.
That, my recollection when we were discussing this part and the 4010, the conflicts of interest in contracts, that, other than, so this 4007, the part that's like really stricter than state law is the city not being able to enter into a contract or renew a contract, with an individual who's an elected official, et cetera, et cetera. So that's A, so they can't. B is if, an individual who's a relative of, one of these people that are covered, or an entity that's wholly or partially owned by them. And I guess my recollection from that, the discussion of that, and we talked to Dan about this, it's, basically this one, this part and the conflicts of interest in contracts are sort of, they were trying to kind of build on like the conflict of interest form they would have to fill out anyway, right?
well, a conflict of interest form, yeah, that's required by statute.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this only applies to them if they have the conflict of interest.
The way I read this is actually broader,
Okay,
because this references a relative rather than immediate family member. So that
Okay.
could be third or fourth cousin for all we know. 'Cause I know
no, there's definition of relative in the front, yeah. Spouse, parent or step-parent, child or stepchild, brother, sister, stepbrother, stepsister. It's, got nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, daughter, son-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law. And then it's got, that like adopted children and, half brothers or whatever, but, no, it's not, I mean, relative is defined. It's broader than immediate family, but it's not boundless.
So, here's the concern that I have as I read this section. There are a lot of families that are estranged from each other and may not have spoken in
Yeah.
years, months, I don't know. So you may not know what your uncle does for a living because you haven't spoken to them in years.
Yeah.
But if you don't comply with this, you're in violation of an ordinance.
Yeah.
So personally, I have a concern with this, with how it's worded. We can deal with it when it comes up, but
Yeah.
I just want you all to be aware that there's some gray areas with this.
Okay,
And I do think that this one in particular is going to be an issue that is brought up.
okay.
There are a lot of contracts with the city that we're gonna be dealing with. And not everyone understands how this ordinance is working and what all they need to disclose. Now, obviously, we're working on all of the training, but it's going to take some time.
I will say, I can't speak for any of my fellow commission members, but I think going into this, we've recognized that this is new. And, we're all aware of that. It's new to us too. So,
So-
yeah.
So the contract could be with company A, but could be subcontracting to company B, C, and D. do you just stop at A, or do you have to whittle all the way down to, not people would play games, but you could submit through a company A and be that subcontractor. I guess, see, that's probably not addressed either.
Not under that section, let me double check the other.
I mean, essentially, you're still benefiting, but you're not the,
I think the way it's worded, no. I
Okay.
don't think that one would be as much of an issue, because you don't have that financial interest in that top contractor.
that top contractor. Okay. Yeah,
It's
it's
an
a little,
ethical gray area.
yeah,
I don't like it,
yeah,
but there's nothing in the ordinance
Yeah.
that says no.
okay.
Sorry.
That was one place where we kind of reined it in.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, 'cause then you're getting into deciding what other outside entities are
Yeah.
doing with their business, so. Okay, a lot of this is pretty common sense, conflicts of interest in decision-making and voting. I think all of you probably understand that, but just to be clear, let's say you volunteer, and you work with a specific organization, and an issue comes up, and you're serving on the Board of Works, and a contract comes up related to them. You're merely a volunteer in their organization, you're not, top of the totem pole, something like that, you would need to recuse yourself. If you had financial gain, then you're looking at a different section of this ordinance, but being a minor peon in that situation, you would need to recuse yourself and you cannot vote. Same would go for council and things like that. Gone over that. Use of city property. I'm gonna kind of give some examples of where this might come in. Because the term property is kind of broad. So let's say, you're an employee that, say, works in the Parks Department, and you have a key to one of the buildings. You can't use your key to enter that building off hours for another purpose. So you can't, have a party in that building outside of work. That's not allowed. So inappropriate use of city property, that's kind of what that's getting at. The police department, for example, they have a take-home vehicle policy. So their use of the city-owned vehicles, you would have to get, let's say you got a complaint on a police officer in particular, you would need to get a copy of that policy to see if there was a violation of that, because they are permitted. Now, let's say a individual in the controller's office decides that they're gonna use a building commissioner employee's vehicle for personal use. Not allowed. See the difference?
I worked in local government. I could tell you stories.
People do some interesting things, so, yeah. But
School
there
system,
are
too.
those employees, like the police department, some building commissioner employees that do have use of city vehicles, but only in certain circumstances. The police have that policy. I believe some fire department employees may have vehicles as well, that are take home.
Street department,
Street department too.
well, I know that they do, I'm not sure what the policy is, I just know that some of the drive the work vehicles home, some of the administration drive their vehicles home.
Okay. So, again, when those complaints come up, you'll have to get a copy of those particular departments' policies to make sure there wasn't a violation of that policy, which in turn would be a violation of the ordinance.
Right.
Okay. Ghost employment is going to be covered on the criminal side because that is a criminal offense.
I'm sorry, could I take you back? So,
Sure.
probably deeper than we need to go, but there's probably some IRS ruling on that as well. So if you're being one who can take home a vehicle, you have to report that on. The reason I'm mentioning that is it's not our obligation to find out if they're reporting that on the IRS. If the policy says you can take it home, that's where it stops.
Yeah, those
Okay.
fringe benefits you don't need to worry about.
You don't need to dig down and see if you're actually reporting it. Okay, thank you.
Under chapter 41, so just how the ethics commission works, does everyone understand all of that? Everyone knows who they were appointed by or voted in, all of that? You understand your terms?
Yes.
Good, all right. On the authority section, which is 41.04, we've gone over most of these. I just wanted to highlight the compelling attendance and testimony of witnesses. So in that scenario, you can decide that you want to just send out a notice and ask them to appear or order them to appear. If they don't comply with that, then you can talk with our office and we can help you work on a subpoena that would require them to come. Some people will come willingly, some will not. Some might need a subpoena so that they can give it to their boss. So just work with them on that when you have those public hearings.
Okay.
We've gone over enforcement, the transparency portal.
Yeah.
Belinda, did you get a chance to talk to IT? How do you want to handle? I thought you had mentioned it in the last meeting, but
No, I've got my notes here on this one. No, I really haven't. I'm not sure how you want that to be set up.
So I sent Belinda some information earlier this week, I think Monday or Tuesday, Monday. Where a list of the things that are in there and what I think, like, and so I was gonna go and talk to her about how to organize that. I said I've been about half sick with, I don't know, whatever was going around the last few days, so I didn't want to go down and meet with her and spread it around. Better today. So a lot of that, it's the transparent, it's the stuff on the purchasing that's going to be a lot. I think a lot of the rest of it, I mean, you'll be however many complaints there are, and what's disclosed publicly, because not everything will go into that. It'll just be the part that's public. So I was wanting to go and talk to her about how she wants to organize that. I have not reached out, at some point, need to reach out, like, to the departments, the boards and commissions and talk to them about, like, what we need them to send in response to that purchasing part. I don't want to do that until, clerk's office knows what they're going to do with it, right? And I figured even then we might say, well, here, let's do, contracts above this amount first, and then, kind of work our way down to the minutia. The intent there is, like, there's nothing that they don't already have, right? It's all documents that are supposed to be generated in the purchasing.
A lot of this it's about knowing where to find it. It's probably already on the website, and it's like request for bids, request for proposals, invitations for documents received, executed contracts. Some of it may not be, but
I'm gonna say a lot of it's not gonna be on the website. It's stuff that would be subject to public records request. But the idea is that, like, you would, if say they send out a quote for bids, that there would be, whatever RFP they put out there, the final proposal from the successful bidder, and then the final proposal, then the other proposals that they evaluated in the context of that. That's, and then there's there are things where they just got quotations, it's like there's like lesser documentation kept, and, you know, that's, what I told Glenn, I need to go back. I had read the purchasing ordinance when we wrote that part, and so there's, I mean, you know, there's dollar cutoffs according to like what sort of documentation is generated, and so the idea, I thought we'd start with like, we know how we're gonna do it, start at the top and work our way down, so that like, I mean, because we're aware that, I mean, even though they have all this, gathering it and getting it to
In
to
one spot.
Belinda will be, I mean, you know, there's some work to be done there, and they have other work to do, so it's,
Is it possible to add this portal to Unicode and just have?
I actually put in
everything?
a ticket
Okay.
after the last meeting, and I followed up with them today, and no one's gotten back to me about putting just a section where we can add all of these things in, like where we have our document, there's all,
yeah,
you guys are listed under, is it unofficial transfer, or,
yeah,
so what I wanted to do was have one of the headings we're not using changed to Muncie Ethics Commission, and then all the subheadings underneath. No one from Unicode's gotten back to me yet. I do have the help desk ticket, in. It seems to me that they could, I'm waiting on that. That's really what I
Yeah.
thought. So we can
Okay.
like hyperlink to the website to Unicode, the transparency portal.
yeah, because then it could be like, you have a link that said, you know, if you want to see the advisory opinions that have been filed, they click on this link, and it takes to that folder in the
Ideally, that's
Unicode.
what I wanna do. I'm just waiting to see if they
Yeah.
can do it.
So,
I love that idea, cause then you're on the same website for all the ordinances and resolutions too,
Mhm.
and then it just makes it easier for everybody.
yeah. So, anyways, I've given her a list of like what I think is going to be in there. I need to fill out some more information on it, because the part that's likely to be like larger is that part on the purchasing, right? Because you do, you know, the city buys a lot of
All
stuff.
kinds of purchase.
But, so, but I don't want to get people, you know, I don't see a point in getting people started sending that stuff to the clerk's office until, you know, they know where they're going to put it. That would be,
Well, I mean, depending on if it goes through Border Works or, you know, a lot of those documents, we're doing the minutes for them, but they don't always give us all different, like, if
yeah,
it's, if it goes through Gretchen's office, we don't always see all
Yeah.
that information. We just keep notes on it.
yeah,
And that's one of the things I've always said is if it's in the minutes, if it's on the agenda, then we need a full copy of every contract. And if there's diagrams or photos involved, we need copies of that. We never got the agreement with the the new fire station. I think that should be part of the public record. Personally, I think anything that's discussed in a meeting that has a piece of paper with it should be attached. That's my opinion, and Lacey's on board with that. We don't always receive that from the departments or administration, is the problem. They don't understand that that's part of the public record. Or,
well, and honestly, I think that's part of why that ended up being in the ordinance. Was some of the feedback we got was, and so we thought, well, let's try and,
I'm all for it.
Get
I
it,
don't
yeah.
have anything against doing that. I will literally sit here in a meeting and say, hey, can I have that piece of paper that you
Yeah.
don't have with someone speaking? Because they're not, you know, the copies that are made for the council members and the attorneys, they never give us copies.
Yeah.
I have to hunt them down.
I think I've sent you copies of all of our stuff,
You do,
so.
you do, you do. I'm just saying, there's other, when someone calls my office and says, hey, I need this information on the annexation, I'm like, well, we have most of it, but that particular thing we don't have, we need to call upstairs. So that's what I'm talking about, like making sure we have everything available. We put it online, we don't get records requests for the things we usually, unless we're missing a piece of documentation.
Yeah.
Most of the time, everything's accessible through our website, so we don't get a lot of that.
If you have trouble getting documents, you know,
All the time.
let me know who you need it from, I'll track it down
Okay.
for you.
Right.
Yeah, well, and speaking of that, when we do get to the point that like we're gonna make the request to the, departments of the Board of Works or whatever, I'll get you in the loop and make sure you know that.
I'll make sure we include all of that in the training as well, and just remind them before you even reach out that it's something you need to be doing, just as a refresher. A lot of them tend to forget about public records and how it's handled, so.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Everything else is kind of criminal related, so I'm gonna stay out of that. Do you all have any questions for me? Yes.
It's not a question, but it's a comment, and it relates to probably two things, and you sort of really addressed it, but you were talking about confidentiality and also denial of records, and whatever you are required to submit needs to be factual scenario. And what's I'm thinking about is it's, you don't ever have to say a person's name, but you can quickly deduce who's being spoken about if you don't stick to relevant facts. I'm just, that's an area of caution to me. And you really were alluding to it. But it can happen unintentionally. You know, I mean, it can be sort of a hot mic or a conversation or a little side something, or just even an open conversation where you don't, but people can identify quickly, especially if people are getting wind of a situation. We're in a small community, so it becomes quite obvious. So that's where keeping things, not withholding information, but giving what's pertinent.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, just understanding that difference.
Yeah, you know, I think along those same lines, so I, out and about a while back, and somebody I kind of knew told me that, hey, you know, something along the, I think I know what your first complaint's gonna be, and I said, well, good, then you know stuff I don't know, and you know, told I said, you know, I don't need to know that. There's no reason I need to know that. I said, if I knew that, I couldn't, you know, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say anything about it. I said, all I can say is, I said, you know, somebody's complaint's gonna be the first one. I said, and, you know, whatever that complaint is, I said, you know, we'll receive it and we'll, you know, go through the procedure that's laid out in the ordinance and our rules, and, you know, we'll, you know, consider the facts. I
Right.
you know, I can't be speculating on like stuff that's gonna come in front of us, and so I think, you know, especially like when we actually get up and start doing things, I mean, you know, we're all out and about in the community and people may want to
Right.
engage in this, and it's like, I don't know, we'll deal with enough of it in here to like,
Right.
I'm not looking for extra opportunities to talk about it.
And people might approach you and wanna tell you, and just try to pick your brain to see if they should file a complaint. You need to shut it down and
So-
say, there's a process, follow
Yeah.
the process.
Well, and that's why we put in the public comment. We want to remind people, it's like, you know, that's not the place to step up and say, you know, you
Right.
think you know who's taking a bribe or whatever. It's like, you know,
Right.
file a complaint. So we appreciate all your help with this. Is that what you got for us tonight?
And at your next meeting, we'll cover everything else, and, I'll see if the, personnel director can come as well, so that she can
Okay.
meet all of you, and,
Okay,
she can go over some of her things as well.
all right. I just got a couple things to mention as we wrap up. So I'll work with Belinda so that we have the complaint form and whatnot up so that people can, you know, file a complaint by the time that ordinance says. You may have noticed she's done some updates to the website already. We've got kind of a description of the commission, you know, the list of the members and our official email addresses. Got a little bit about the Ethics Advisory Committee, since all those records are there too, just, you know, mentioning that. And so there'll be, in between that, we'll put the, you know, people can get the complaint. Our next meeting is March 12th. My expectation is that, like, we've got some more procedures to do, but we should be able to cut back to meeting once a month unless we just get so much work that we have to meet twice. And so, my expectation is we'll be meeting once a month on the second Wednesday, unless things come up and require the additional meeting. Next month, so we'll come back with, a hopefully final version of this advisory opinion process. I've started working on, mainly reading a bunch, but the next thing we need to get in place is the public hearing process. And I reached out to the Bloomington, Human Rights Commission. They sent me theirs, and I've sort of a lot to take in there, look through, but it seems like it is a better model, say, than the Police Merit Commission, which is what I was looking at first. So, that's my next, get that, and I'll run that by you, make sure like there's no landmines in it or anything, and then, so, that, and we can do the rest of the training at the next meeting, and we'll get this done. Anything else?
No.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Okay.
Imagine that, nobody's opposed. Long meeting, but a lot of things covered, so that's good.
Well, at this point, I'm just trying to get everything they need up and going, and like I said, never got a message back from Unico yet. But I did.
By the way, thank you guys for all the work on this. You guys,
It
Oh,
was him.
it's-
It
Was
was
it? Yeah, was it?
99% him.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
very helpful, because
I've been thinking about this stuff for like well over a year now, so,
You're probably happy to just see it coming to fruition and being able to continue getting these details worked out.
yeah, you've got a good eye for